So for Sunday school this morning, we are, to catch those up that haven't been with us for a while, we are at the end of Matthew. We're at Matthew 27, starting verse 32. So oh, the air conditioning came on. So I made the decision to, so we are at the crucifixion. And so I made the decision that after just celebrating Jesus's birth, and so it feels kind of out of sync to be talking about his crucifixion this week, but that's where we are. So I'm going to limit today's lesson to his crucifixion and death, and then next week we will finish up with the resurrection. So Sarah, are you teaching next week or is Susan?
I think Susan is.
Okay, all right. So that's what we're going to do next week, is finish it up. And then our plan after we finish Matthew is to do a study that the denomination has put out. It's a 5-week study course, and we're going to do that. So for the month of January and a little bit of February. So, all right. So Sarah, can you read? Is this noise of the air? Can y'all hear that?
No.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. So Sarah, would you read verses 32 through 44? And just to sort of recap, we've gone through Jesus' trial with the Sanhedrin and Pontius Pilate, and then the soldiers taking him and stripping him of his clothes and mocking him, "Hail, King of the Jews," spitting on him, took a reed and hit him on his head. And so in these verses, the they that are referred to are the governor's soldiers, is who the they is that this passage refers to. All right, Sarah.
Okay. As they were going out, they found a Cyrenian man, Simon by name, and they impressed him into their service to bear Jesus's cross. When they had come to the place which is called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull, they offered him wine mingled with gall to drink, and when he had tasted it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots for them. And as they sat there, they watched him. Above his head, they had placed a written copy of the charge on which he was being executed. "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." Then they crucified along with him 2 brigands, one on the right hand and one on the left. Those who were passing by kept flinging their insults at him. They kept shaking their heads and saying, "Destroyer of the temple and builder of it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are really the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also with the scribes and the elders jeered at him. "He saved others," they kept saying. "He cannot save himself. He is King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe on him. He trusted in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" The brigands too, who were crucified with him, hurled the same reproaches at him.
Barclay starts off his comments on this passage by making a statement that I thought was pretty meaningful, that the story of the crucifixion does not need commentary. Its power resides simply in the telling. All we can do is paint in the background in order that the picture may be as clear as possible. So I think the things I wanted to add to that are, I thought that was a nice description, to paint the background to make it as clear as possible. So to go back to the beginning of the passage, that they found a Cyrenian man, Simon, that we don't know much about him. Mark identifies him as the father of Alexander and Rufus. And so apparently Alexander and Rufus were somebody that were known in the church at that time. But other than that, we don't know anything about Simon. Barclay also gives the background information that in the Roman custom with the crucifixion, that the person being crucified would carry the crossbeam of his own cross, and that the upright piece was already waiting at the scene of the execution, and that the charge that the person is being executed for would be written on a board, and then that board was either hung around his neck or carried by an officer in front of the procession. And then that board was later put on the cross itself. So the criminal was led to the scene of crucifixion by as long a route as possible, so that as many as possible might see him and take warning from this grim sight. So Jesus has already been through what Barclay terms a terrible scourging. He'd undergone the mockery of the soldiers, and before that had undergone examination for most of the night, and so probably was pretty physically exhausted. And Roman soldiers knew what to do. And then the folks living in that area, they, as a occupied country, the Jews knew that all a Roman soldier had to do, or a Roman officer, was tap a Jew on the shoulder with the flat of his spear, as Barclay describes it. And the man had to carry out whatever task that officer wanted. So Cyrene was, Simon being from Cyrene was in North Africa, and probably was in Jerusalem for Passover. So then as far as the description of Jesus, the soldiers offering him this wine mingled with gall to drink, which would have been pretty horrendous, and Jesus refuses it. Apparently it had become there's some Jewish writing that indicates that at that time, wealthy Jewish women would provide wine, a drugged wine, to help ease the pain for folks who were being crucified. And in Mark describes it as wine mixed with myrrh, which would help to deaden the pain. But Matthew describes it as wine mixed with gall. Any comments or questions so far? This is tough to think about. Barclay also gives some background and insight into Jewish clothing traditions at that time. Because remember, the Roman soldiers had taken his clothes. So the part of the crucifixion tradition was that the criminals were crucified with just a loincloth on. And the criminals' clothes became the property of the soldiers as part of their perks, Barclay describes it. And every Jew wore 5 articles of clothing: his shoes, his turban, his girdle, his inner garment, and his outer cloak. So there were 5 items of clothing and 4 soldiers. And the shoes, the turban, the girdle, and an inner garment, they would have all been considered equal value, Barclay says, with that outer cloak being the most valuable. So, in the soldiers drawing lots for his clothing, Barclay is speculating that it was probably his outer cloak that they were most interested in. And then the place of Golgotha, it meant the place of the skull. And Barclay says it was called that because it was in the shape of a skull, that the location was in the shape of a skull. So in going back to the three tauntings of Jesus, first there were the passersby that were flinging insults, call him destroyer of the temple, builder of it in 3 days, save yourself. And so those were just the regular passersby. And then the chief priests and elders, basically the Sanhedrin, who had tried him the night before, they came down, came by, also taunting him. And then the two that were being crucified with Jesus, the brigands, that was a term I was not familiar with. Have any of the rest of you heard the term brigand?
In relation to like pirate speak.
Yeah, I've read it before.
Yeah, so bandit, robber, member of a gang was the definition that I read. So, so they were taunting him. But Matthew's presentation is a little bit different than Luke's. In Luke, remember that one of the brigands repented with Jesus there on the cross. But in Matthew, the two that are there with him are also hurling reproaches at him as well, as Barclay translates it. One of the other sources I've read made the point that in the comments that the Sanhedrin or chief priests and elders and all were making to Jesus as they came by, he saved others. Why isn't he saved? He can't save himself. He's the king of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now and we'll believe in him. That those are theology. Those are statements that the Gospels reject. The gospel is pretty clear that that's not what Jesus's ministry is about. So any other comments you want to make before we move on?
Possibly, Matthew put that in about the two brigands, I think it's an English term, just to reinforce, the whole situation. Because my personal feelings is two people nailed on the cross in the condition they're in probably are not in the condition to hurl insults to anybody. I think that's probably an illumination to reinforce the point, more so than maybe actual fact, but conjecture on my part.
Well, one commentator also along those lines, Harold, made the point that Matthew presents Jesus's crucifixion, that he is really in this by himself. The disciples are gone. Even the two robbers that are there, the people being crucified with him are hurling taunts, that he's really in this by himself as far as how Matthew presents it. So there is one final thing that Barclay, says about this passage in Matthew that I'd like to read. General William Booth of the Salvation Army once said about this mocking of Jesus, that is precisely because he would not come down that we believe in him. And the Jews could see God only in power, but Jesus showed that God is sacrificial love. All right, so the next 5 verses are describing Jesus' death. So in the absence of Susan this week, Sarah, would you mind reading it?
I'll be glad to. From 12 noon, darkness came over the earth until 3 p.m. About 3 p.m., Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of those who were standing there heard this and said, this man is calling for Elias. And immediately one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. The rest said, let be. Let us see if Elias will come to save him. When Jesus had again shouted with a great voice, he gave up his spirit.
Okay. So here, Matthew gives us, some detail that from noon to 3, things were dark. You know, the sky, the darkness came over the earth. And then about 3 o'clock is when Jesus died. Mark gives a little bit more detail, saying that Jesus was crucified at the 3rd hour, which would have been about 9 o'clock in the morning, and then died at, he also says, at 3 o'clock or at the 9th hour. So basically, you know, based on that information that Mark gives, Jesus was on the cross for about 6 hours. So, because usually, and for Jesus, that would have been mercifully brief, as Barclay describes it, because most of the time crucifixions lasted for days. So then verse 46, which is where Sarah read, my God, why have you forsaken me? Does anybody remember which psalm also has that same verse? I know Cindy knows.
I read my homework at Psalm 22.
So, so Sarah gets a gold star. So yeah, Psalm 22, and Barclay talks about how there are several verses from Psalm 22 that, as we read this story, sound very similar. So I thought we'd take the time to read it. All right. Of course, we all know Psalm 23, but Psalm 22. And this is the very first verse of it. My God, why have you forsaken me? The words of my groaning do nothing to save me. My God, I call by day, but you do not answer, at night, but I find no respite. Yet you, the Holy One, who make your home in the praises of Israel, in you our ancestors put their trust. They trusted and you set me free. And you set them free. To you they called for help and were delivered. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm, not a man, scorn of mankind, contempt of the people. All who see me jeer at me. They sneer and wag their heads. He trusted himself to Yahweh, yet let Yahweh set him free. Let him deliver him, as he took such delight in him. It was you who drew me from the womb and soothed me on my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth. From the womb I have belonged to you. Do not hold aloof, for trouble is upon me, and no one to help me. Many bulls are encircling me, wild bulls of Bashan closing in on me, lions ravening and roaring, opening their jaws at me. My strength is trickling away. My bones are all disjointed. My heart has turned to wax, melting inside me. My mouth is dry as earthenware. My tongue sticks to my jaw. You lay me down in the dust of death. A pack of dogs surrounds me, a gang of villains closing in on me as if to hack off my hands and my feet. I can count every one of my bones while they look on and gloat. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. Yahweh, do not hold aloof. My strength, come quickly to my help. Rescue my soul from the sword, the one life I have from the grasp of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, my poor life from the wild bull's horns. I shall proclaim your name to my brothers, praise you in full assembly. Yet you who fear Yahweh, praise him. All the race of Jacob honor him. Revere him, all the race of Israel. For he has not despised nor disregarded the poverty of the poor, has not turned away his face, but has listened to the cry for help. Of you is my praise in the thronged assembly. I will perform my vows before all who fear him. The poor will eat and be filled. Those who seek Yahweh will praise him. May your heart live forever. The whole wide world will remember and return to Yahweh. All the families of nations bow down before him. For to Yahweh, ruler of the nations, belongs kingly power. All who prosper on earth will bow before him. All who go down to the dust will do reverence before him. All who are dead, their descendants will serve him, will proclaim his name to generations still to come. And these will tell of his saving justice to a people yet unborn. He has fulfilled it. So I know that was kind of long to listen to, but I appreciate you doing that, because there's, to me, it's pretty powerful how so many images from Psalm 22 are reflected in the crucifixion story. So it's Barclay, in talking about this, talks about how that through time several folks have suggested or speculated on what may have happened with Jesus during that time. And I'm interested to hear what you guys think about this, that some, Barclay says, have suggested or speculated that maybe Jesus was reciting this psalm to himself as he hung on the cross. Barclay doesn't think that would have been possible.
I agree. If you're in a lot of pain, all you're thinking about is the pain. I like the way Barclay put it. When you hurt that much, reciting poetry is not on your top 10 list or something to that effect. I've been hurt and nowhere near the level of agony that Jesus would have been in. And there's no way I would have been able to pull up a memorized poem out of my brain. So yeah, I agree with Barclay. He was not reciting anything.
But it could be that one line occurred to him. Sometimes one line of a movie or a play or a song will come into your head because of the circumstances that you're in.
Well, and actually, when I'm in pain, I do try to get something like that in my brain, not necessarily that one, but something that is something else for me to focus on other than the fact that I'm in pain. And so I actually, like when I had dental work one time, I remember I was trying to do some kind of verse in my head. I can't remember which one it was, but I remember thinking that I needed to put my brain somewhere else. So I think it's possible.
Okay.
Now, how often, and you can answer this if you want, growing up, we all had to, most of us had to memorize the 23rd Psalm. How many times in your life have you turned to the 23rd Psalm for consolation in times of distress?
Lots.
And the 23rd Psalm is something we're all familiar with. I wonder if Jesus was pretty familiar, if not memorized, nearly all of the Psalms, or good portions of them. I can't help but wonder that, knowing, that the Psalms are something that, the Jewish faith uses regularly, much more often than we do. So kind of food for thought. So Barclay also speculates that how it's described as far as Jesus' death, that at the moment, that in that moment of his death, the weight of the world's sin fell upon the heart and the being of Jesus, that he really felt that weight at that time. And that the penalty which he bore for us was the inevitable separation from God, which sin brings.
I wish Barclay had given us some scripture to back that up. You know, we keep making up Christianity, you know, and you guys know, I keep saying, let's look at what is written down. And that's not written down. The closest we can come to a lot of this is the prophecy, you know, like the Psalms or other prophets. But we really do use our own intellect to connect the dots. And I think sometimes we ought to not just read what's there. And, you know, and Barclay, I mean, I love Barclay, but Barclay is a bit of a romantic and sort of likes to make up stuff too. So I don't know. Matthew does not say that. That's all.
I can't disagree with you, Harold, that Barclay does add a lot of his own speculation sometimes. And but I think, you know, if Jesus was fully human, what would this moment be like? If he's fully divine, what would this moment be like? No. So, but those who were listening to him and hearing him cry out didn't quite understand what he was saying. You know, they thought he was crying out to Elias or Elijah. So either way, it was, you know, a horrendous time. But Barclay makes the note that, you know, Jesus calling out, my God, why have you forsaken me, was not the last thing that he uttered, or the last word. Matthew describes it as a great shout with a great voice. And then he gave up his spirit.
What language is that written in?
The great shout.
Yeah, the Eli, Eli. What language is that?
I'm gonna have to defer to Cindy. Do you know,
I
Cindy?
think it's Aramaic, but I'm not positive. But I think
That's
it's
my guess too, but Barclay doesn't say.
My question is, though, I can't think of another instance where Jesus is quoted in Aramaic. Is there another instance?
Well, the earliest copy of Matthew was written in Hebrew. So, which is, again, why I still maintain it's a lot older than a lot of scholars say, but it could be also Hebrew in the sense they have found the earliest copies of Matthew written in Hebrew.
And I just looked in the People's Commentary, Craddock and Goring. It doesn't say what language it is either. So, but Barclay does make the point that in the book of John, John says that Jesus cried out with the words, "It is finished," is how it's translated in English. But in the Greek, it's the word tetelestai, which is a word used typically for those who have come out of the dark into glory light. It's a victor shout. Is how John describes Jesus' last utterance before he dies.
So that's significantly different from this, which is a cry of despair.
Yeah, because Barclay translates that sentence, and if any of you have another translation, Barclay translate, when Jesus had again shouted with a great voice, he gave up his spirit. So I could.
How did Mark describe the last moments right before Jesus's death?
Have you got it, Claire? Well, I think Claire went to get her Bible.
No,
Right,
no, I'm
flipping.
looking. I don't.
Oh, okay. I'm looking to.
It has in my Bible, it has the Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani.
Yeah, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then in verse 37, but Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last.
But it doesn't say what gave another loud cry.
Yeah,
It doesn't say what.
yeah. So John is the only one that describes him as saying a word, whereas the three synoptic gospels describe him as giving a cry. Any other thoughts at this point? Right. I'll read
And-
this. Go ahead.
in Luke. And then Jesus had cried with a loud voice. He said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost.
Oh, thank you for correcting me.
No, I'm
No,
not correcting. I'm just
adding. Thank you. All right, so I'll read verses 51 through 56. And look you, Barclay with his look you, the veil of the temple was rent in two from top to bottom, and the earth was shaken, and the rocks were split, and the tombs were opened, and the bodies of many of God's dedicated ones were raised. And they came out of the tombs after his resurrection and came into the holy city and appeared to many. The centurion and those who were watching Jesus with him saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, and they were exceedingly afraid. Truly, they said, this man was the Son of God. Many women were watching from a distance. They were the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee, giving their service to him. Among them were Mary from Magdala, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So at the point that Jesus dies, three amazing things happen. One is, remember in the temple, there was the veil or this curtain that separated the rest of the temple, and that place behind the curtain was called the Holy of Holies. No one went in there except for the high priest on one event, the Day of Atonement. That was the only time anybody went in there. So the gospel, Matthew describes, and the gospels describe that veil was torn. So what would that mean? That curtain is ripped apart.
It was old.
I can't hear you, Harold.
I'm just saying, it was old.
No, I mean, if that was what separated man from God, then that was torn down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My Bible says symbolizing that the barrier between God and humanity was removed.
Yeah. That for the most part, God had been hidden and remote, and no one knew what he was like, is how Barclay describes it. But in the death of Jesus, we see the hidden love of God, and the way of the presence of God, once barred to everyone, is now open to all. The life and the death of Jesus show us what God is like and remove forever the veil which concealed him from men and women. And there are also,
Barclay discounts the prophets pretty heavily then.
that's how you see it at that point?
Well, I mean, if only then did God reveal himself to the Jews. All the prophets, all they've been telling everybody, and didn't mean much then, I guess, according to Barclay. I think the prophets have told, humanity, the Jews, what God was like for quite a long time. And if you remember when we studied the prophets, they basically said the same things to a large degree as what Jesus said. So, I like studying the prophets, remember? Remember?
True. Then in Jesus is bringing a new covenant to us. Isn't he bringing us a new perception of God, a new experience with God? Isn't that what this is symbolic of?
Well, I mean, I can make up anything that is symbolic of, but I just, again, I would rather go with what Jesus said. And after the resurrection is the first time he opened the invitation to all people. So, you can make that connection for sure, but again, we're kind of connecting dots based on what he really said. He did, two things he said. He didn't say, I'm a sacrificial lamb that has to be killed for the forgiveness of all sin. I can't find that in the Gospels. But he did say, I'm doing this to prove who I am. And then after the resurrection, he told the disciples to go to all men, not just the Jews. So I think that's in there. The rest, I'm not sure about.
I also think there had been the symbol of the temple and the Holy of Holies, that God resided in that Holy of Holies. And there was only one person that had access to that space one day of the year. And so with the tearing of that curtain, there is that symbol then that God is not present just in that one space and accessible on by one person one day of the year.
Because Jesus did say, now I can't get it, exactly, of course, now you go to the temple to worship, but someday that will not be the case. Does anyone understand what I'm referencing? I have to find it. Maybe when he is, I can't remember. Is it when he's talking with the Samaritan woman and she's talking about where we go to worship? At the well?
It is.
I always thought of the tearing of that that curtain as a real strong sign to the temple leadership that they screwed the pooch in a big way. You know, they had to be totally terrified when that happened. If that wasn't a wake-up call, I don't know what would be.
Not to mention the earthquake.
Yeah,
Right.
that and the eclipse for 3 hours.
Yeah, that some speculate that darkness was an eclipse. And this was a part that had kind of gone over my head that I really had missed. And the tombs were open and the bodies of many of God's dedicated ones were raised. And they came out of the tomb after the resurrection, out of their tombs with a plural, and appeared to many. You've read that before, but this time in really looking at it, I had kind of missed that. So there
Me
basically
too.
were 3 sort of apocalyptic things that happened. The curtain was the veil was ripped and torn, the earthquake, and these tombs being open. Of course, I think it's just in Matthew that has that. But
See, I always associate that with the earthquakes, because anytime you have something like that, if you have people buried in rocks and caves, if you have an earthquake, things could open up and bodies could literally reappear. I mean, to me, that all
yeah, well,
makes
they came into the holy city after the resurrection. And so,
It could be a symbol, God, Jesus represented God of the future and God of the present, and maybe that's a symbol of God of the past. I'll shut up.
I like that, Bernie.
no.
I like that there is that representation. I mean, think about, we've been talking about symbols here. Religion is full of symbols, to help us have things to remind us of God's relationship with us. We need that physical reminder.
Well, in the big picture sense, he came here to change the law, basically. As you guys have been talking, it's to bring God to each individual directly rather than through a rabbi or through some spiritual leadership. And, this is part of changing the law.
Yeah. All right. So I want to finish up on one last note, that the women who were watching from a distance, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee, those 3 are named. But it's both of the commentaries made that point about these women were not just in Galilee, which is where they started. They came with Jesus and were there with him in Jerusalem. And we've talked several times, and I know in CWF we talk about this a lot, that women were very much a part of Jesus' ministry. And so to me, the power that those women were there watching from a distance. So now we're going to move to celebrating the Epiphany. So this morning is kind of swinging back and forth. So I hope all of you start feeling better real soon, and stay safe. So Happy New Year to everybody.